to the Mindful Living podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and this is the space where we explore stories every day, how they meet radical transformation. And today we are not just talking about healing, we are stepping inside the spaces where harm begins and asking what it takes to transform them. Now, listeners, my guest today is Christopher Quigley. He is an artist, activist, and a survivor. After suffering two life altering strokes in 2023, Christopher, well, could have gone quiet, but he chose to reimagine his voice. And with it, he also reimagined the spaces where gender based violence often starts: bathroom stalls, locker rooms, and the so called in between places that society overlooks. And through his non-profit Alchemia Art Workshop and his national project, which is transformation of dangerous spaces, Christopher creates immersive installations that force us to look, feel, and maybe heal. So, today we unpack his journey from survival to expression and how art holds perpetrators accountable and what it means to reclaim dangerous space as a sacred ground. So, Christopher, welcome to the show. And as always, I am absolutely honored to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you again. Thank you so much for speaking with me again. It's always a joy. Oh,
Christopher, so, uh, many of us, we dissociate from harm when it's woven into a daily routine. We don't always realize what that familiarity, it doesn't equal safety. So, uh, if you can take us back to that moment, which started the journey of creating Alchemia Art Workshop, and create and when you realize that these everyday spaces like locker rooms and bathroom stalls, they held more danger than people admit.
so where this started was a conversation about housing. That's where this actual project began, and that's what my intent was, to help create a housing project that would um, help take a local space, a home where we had a woman that was murdered by her partner. Her name was Elaine Mosher. And I always want to be sure that I give her name credit, because her name is, or this project is sort of dedicated to her memory. And it's what spawned this project. It was born out of grief, and I wanted to create spaces or take homes
Mm.
that had, where women had been murdered, and convert them into safe spaces that would be part of transition homes. So women that were escaping their partners and needing a safe place, this would be a place where they could reintegrate. And I had met with Kellyanne Hamshaw, who is a local executive director of an organization here called um, Harbor House Transition Services. And we just spoke. We just started talking about a lot of systems. We started talking about the systems that fail men, the systems that fail women. We started talking about socialization, and how socialization of boys and socialization of women, and how women are socialized in response to how boys are socialized. And she asked me, she was very polite and said, we're very grateful for this proposal, but I've seen your history and I see what you're trying to do. Would you be interested in developing an art piece that would be geared towards boys, young men, and men, to acknowledge and reckon their own complicity and their own understanding of where they learn the vernacular and how they're socialized and where they learn the vocabulary? And I created it because I have a deep personal connection to the topic. It's not abstract, it's not distant for me, it's not metaphorical, it's historical, because those are the places where I learned and I actually had to think about, like, where I actually learned a lot of the jokes and the things and the misogyny that I had heard, and I was like, I learned this in the locker room, was with my sports team at school, and understood that, even the places where I was physically assaulted repeatedly was either in the boys' bathroom or in the locker room, where it was closed behind closed doors and it was away from prying eyes, and had understood that this is a historical account. It's personal and it's close to home and it's my lived experience. And it's my way of turning a point in my life that was very painful into something that might actually help others. And so I looked at this and I was like, oh, these are the spaces where I experienced the most violence. It's where I learned the language, where I learned the jokes that I shouldn't have laughed at. It's where I learned how dominance is displayed and where boys learn this. And so on a literal level, I'm talking about the physical spaces like locker rooms and bathroom stalls and, like you said, those quiet, overlooked environments that we kind of do away with, to also on a metaphorical level where it's like the emotional and psychological spaces that we hold in our hearts and in our inside of us, like trauma and shame, exclusion and fear. And I created 8 recreated, reimagined bathroom stalls, public bathroom stalls that each touch on a theme of gender-based violence and how boys are socialized and how they learn and what they learn.
Hmm. No, that is really, really thoughtful and a very empowering, uh, yet to some extent it can be such a harsh realization, because most of the times, as I mentioned in the beginning, we kind of don't even realize for the fact, because it's happening. These conversations, they're happening so naturally and kind of organically, that we do not even are aware of the fact. Um, and uh, do you think, Christopher, that the cultural silence around these spaces is this part of why the violence there persists?
This is a really good comment, and thank you. It is because we're shaped by these things. We're shaped by those experiences. We're shaped by the things that we don't always name. And this is meant to bring those spaces into the open so that we can finally see them, feel them, point them out, name them, and then start to fix them. And I also have to kind of include that there are where we are in, as part of this piece, exploring the evolution of how these spaces, how they've evolved. When I was growing up as a young man, and we're talking, I'm 52 now, so we're going back, a few years, that was an analog, it was an analog education. We didn't have the internet at that time, so all the things and all the information was transmitted to us through an analog source. And so one of the other spaces that we're having to look at that's becoming a dangerous space are the online platforms. And the online platforms that allow men, and I will call them what they are. These are mediocre men with a microphone. They are at the pulpit with a large following. They have young boys and young men following this language and this rhetoric. And they're creating a culture and they're socializing these boys and young men and even, some older men at a scale that we just can't comprehend. And I have to look at the online spaces that are being created, the online forums, the chats, the videos, the all of those, as the online organizations that allow these people to be monetized, that allow them to have an audience, that they are complicit, that they are creating dangerous spaces for these men to espouse these very dangerous these very dangerous ideas, and we're looking at young men and boys being radicalized earlier and earlier. And I think that's the term that I think we have to really address is it is a radicalization because they're not being taught how to love. They're being taught how to hate. And they're doing it
Yeah.
behind closed doors in their bedrooms and in their own bathrooms at home. And when they're told to come out for dinner, they turn their iPad off, they come out, and what they've learned is who to hate. And a lot of it is being directed at women. And that is where we have to start addressing and start looking at and pointing out and saying, this is the problem. This is also a problem. These people are creating spaces for these people to espouse this type of rhetoric and this dangerous rhetoric. So we're looking at again both a metaphorical space and a literal space with these men having a pulpit that is addressing and having an audience of eager young men and boys that are just trying to figure out who they are. They're still too young and being told that women are the problem, and that's a problem.
Yeah, that is striking. Unfortunately, I believe it's true. It's true, and uh, once again, I also absolutely agree. I mean, this couldn't make any more um sense and a whole relevance as well, Christopher. And also, you are taking spaces that people, they avoid talking about and putting them center stage. Once again, that eerie feeling, when suddenly you realize it and it kind of, the spotlight is on you. So did that ever feel exploitative or even dangerous for your audience or yourself?
That's I think I need a bit of clarity on that question. I'm not sure I follow it entirely. What part is exploitative? Are you talking about the topic itself or the spaces that the spaces that I've chosen to explore?
Yeah, I think it's about the topic itself.
So we have a problem in Canada, and it's one in three women in Canada experience intimate partner violence. And in 2024, there was over 163,000 reported incidents. So that breaks it down to a little over about 350 a day, or about one every 4 minutes. And we had a mass shooting that was here, and 6 women that were killed in a very short period of time. And we have what was called the mass casualty report that came out. And one of the demands out of the mass casualty report was to have men step up and be more involved in solving this problem of intimate partner violence and gender based violence because this is a public health crisis and it's a justice issue. And that means that this is also, incumbent on our local governments to take action. But it was very clearly spelled out by the authors of the mass casualty report that men should step up and take a more active approach. So this was my voice stepping into it. And just, we've my history for the almost 20 years, I have fabricated more artworks for other people throughout my career. I have worked with some really amazing artists and architects and developers all over North America, helping them fabricate their pieces. And then when I got sick, when I had the stroke, well, 2 strokes, I was rewired differently when I came out of it. I am a far more emotional man than I was previous because I was in corporate and I had a very different trajectory, a very different life. And I don't want this to come across as that I'm trying to mythologize having had the stroke and what came out of it. But I looked at this and I was asked by Kellyanne Hamshaw, who's the executive director here, to develop something, and I took it very seriously. And the emotion that I had, revolving around Elaine Mosher's death was real because it hit me. I am a far more emotional man. I feel like I'm far more in touch with that side of me than I was before, and I felt compelled to be part of this, to be a part. And we have to also look that this isn't, gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, as much as it is, it's called a women's issue, it's actually a men's issue because women have, been at this for decades. It's
Mm.
tireless daily advocacy and education and awareness campaigns. And, the numbers remain stubborn. Those don't change. And the reason is that too often men aren't part or not as much a part of the conversation. And I wanted this project to change that because I wanted it to be a piece that went, you know what, this is no more. It's going to be something that invites men into the dialogue in a way that's really direct and human and impossible to look away from. It's just one man's response. It's my voice. I don't have all the answers, but this was my contribution. And that's the way I had to look at it. If the the term exploitative, I'm not sure fits because this came from a place of genuine interest and it's genuine. It is what I wanted it to be because I wanted it to be a space where real change can start. And I'm inviting men in to feel something, to feel some discomfort, to sit in the mess that they've created, to acknowledge it and to lose the illusion of control and understand that, we have to help fix this. This is what we created. We created this. And the women have borne the brunt of it for, a millennia. We have to break that. And yeah, that's a very long-winded answer to a really poignant question you gave, but I hope that was I hope that kind of fit.
No, absolutely, and that was more than enough because it kind of beautifully summarizes the reason, the motivation behind doing this. It's not just for the sake of it, but there are lived experiences. There is a bit of vulnerability in there. However, it's more towards uh, what has been or is happening is still unaddressed, or people they tend to not address to this. um, and I think through your visualization and um, through this you are trying to get into bring this into limelight, which can be, because it's confrontational.
Yes.
uh, it can be really really uncomfortable, especially when we talk about men. um there's a bit of insecurity when it involves a kind of something which is opposing to what they believe, strongly believe, and the circle around them, the people around them, they also kind of are a part of it. So it can be
Sure.
really confrontational.
And it's meant to be. It is meant to be because I also want to mention that just because a woman reports violence doesn't mean that it ends. It only ends when men stop allowing it to happen. And that's the hard truth. That's the hard truth about this. And this project aims to tell it. It aims to be like this is for you to understand where you're hearing this from and shun it. Like though that rhetoric that they're hearing that they're bringing on is not helpful. And it's not. There needs to be far more action. And if this project can help steer some young men and boys into a better direction, that's the goal. And, and you mentioned this comes from lived experience. I've seen it in my own family. I've witnessed abuse many times. the police. We've had, there have been police interaction with our family and with our family members. And this isn't a this is only coming from my own lived experience and expressing it in the only way I knew how.
True. And before we wrap up, Christopher, as you mentioned about your stroke and how it kind of, post stroke, it gave you that much needed emotional vulnerability in there, um, which I also believe, we often kind of it's kind of a more of a gender uh, based aspect that women are more emotional than men. If men are emotional, that's something very not much common. It's kind of brushed around or shunned off in general conversations, often seen as a weakness, but it's not. Uh, so, what was the most unexpected in that journey? Like something you didn't see coming.
The scale of this project, I did not see coming. When we talk about the emotions, and you're very correct when you state, men are taught not to acknowledge their emotions. Men are taught, and I'm they're meant to stay quiet. They're meant to grow up, be a man, and there's a tremendous amount of cultural shorthand that
Mm.
is established around men and how they approach their life and how they are formed, and like everything from don't stop crying, be a man, buck up, do all these things, don't be and if I can swear, you can might have to black it out, or but don't be a pussy, don't be all these things, and it's all these things about regressing and not acknowledging that you have feelings. And when I got out of the stroke, the it did rewire my brain. Like I said, I'm a very different person emotionally than I was prior to the stroke. I feel things far more deeply. Every conversation, little things that happen between me and friends, those things hold a tremendous amount of weight. And I've learned, over the past 2 years I tell my friends and my family I love them all the time, because I do.
Mm.
I feel this incredible sense of empathy and joy in everything I do now. And this project was just a really great way to focus that and be like, I don't have to listen to the voices that are telling me to stay quiet. I don't have to listen to that training and that hidden curriculum that we learned in school. I don't need to acknowledge that anymore. But what I do need to acknowledge is that there were points in my life that I was complicit, where again, I laughed at jokes I shouldn't have. I said the things I shouldn't have. I may have stayed quiet in the light of, understanding or knowledge of somebody else's issues that they were having regarding their partners. But I'm looking at this, it's just for people to open up space in themselves and bring it into the light and invite people to feel and reflect, and much like me, maybe start healing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before we wrap up, as in, I think when it comes to confronting pain and healing, um, you know, if we look at psychology, I mean, it tells us that exposing trauma too forcefully, it can re-traumatize. Have you ever wondered, Christopher, that if your work could reopen wounds instead of helping heal? I mean, where is the balance, if there is, any
Sa-
required? How do you create that?
Sana, I'm so glad you asked that, because when I was researching this piece and how to present it, I was presenting it to policymakers and frontline workers and academics,
Yeah.
and the amount of feedback that I got was amazing. It was all very positive. However, one piece of feedback that came back from one frontline worker, her name is Sue Bookchin. She is the executive director at the Be the Peace Institute, and she read through the entire, like the massive. It's a massive manifesto that has the 20 pages of detail about the piece itself. And she emailed me back and she said, Christopher, I have had an incredibly visceral reaction to this. She goes, this, just even reading it, she said, I had emotional reactions I wasn't expecting. And for me, I was like, this is fantastic. This is exactly what I wanted. And then as I read on, she's like, you need to incorporate some trauma informed practice with this piece because we can't be pushing these young men and boys into the deep end of the pool. And that was my take on this was like, we don't need to be led into this with, being having our hands held. I want it to be very, to the point of confrontational where I just push them in the pool. And with a number of people, our one of our local town councilors, Allison, she also said, you need to make sure that there's trauma informed practice. So with this piece, wherever it goes in Canada, we'll have trauma informed therapists at the beginning and at the end. So at the beginning, there's always going to be the explicit consent that this is what you're going to be going into, because we have to kind of look at this as a modern day house of horrors. Like if you've ever been to a midway fair or carnival, there's the haunted house, and this is very similar to that. And so, but with this, I am having communities step up and provide trauma informed therapists that basically give people a preamble at the beginning. You need to understand what this is going to be so that there's an explicit consent being provided to us from the participants. And at the end, these trauma informed therapists will be there to provide a debrief. So each group that goes through will be sitting in a group and discussing what they heard, what they saw, what they experienced, and what they interacted with, and having a debrief at the end so that there is some way for this to be developmental and good and have some good come out of it and not just reopen wounds. It is meant to allow there to be an entry point and a soft landing. But in between, it's going to be far more, and you don't have to complete it if you don't want to. However, this is going to be up to the participant. And I want them to have that choice that they are not forced into anything. This is what this is going to be. This may be difficult for some people, but we have people available that will be able to comfort and provide some level of debrief at the end of it and some level of aftercare after the piece, after they've experienced it, because it will have a ability to reopen some wounds for some people and re-traumatize, but that's not the goal. But we do have the trauma informed practice included in this, and that was very, very much needed. And I'm very glad that I did go down that path because it does allow for this softer entry and more of a soft landing at the end of
That's a very mindful approach in there, Christopher. I think that is absolutely crucial, essential, and yes, you're right. It's a choice, and it's totally up to the participants, and each one has their own way of healing and looking at this. So I think I'm really glad that you have kind of uh, included everything, not only the experience, but before looking at the experience, exploring it, and then post having that experience as well. So it's quite a holistic and mindful approach to this. So, Christopher, before we wrap up, if our listeners they would like to check more about Alchemia Art Workshop and more about transformation through dangerous spaces, what would be the best way?
So our website, our nonprofit, the nonprofit organization that's producing this is one that I founded called Alchemia Art Workshop. And the links I guess I'll provide to you is alchemiaartworkshop.org. Um, our entire detail about the project is on there. All of our endorsements from across the country are on there, from our local politicians to federal politicians to municipal support. And the board of directors is on there. People are wanting to know who those folks are, but also how to donate, because we will be starting our fundraising campaign in earnest on August 1st. And there is access to our donor page on alchemiaartworkshop.org. And I can also provide a QR code, which allows people to access it far quicker with their phones.
That's great. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And Christopher, thank you for trusting us with your story, your journey, um, one marked by survival, courage, and your unflinching honesty. And I also believe that your work through Alchemy Art Workshop, it flips the script. Dangerous spaces becoming places where dialogue, accountability, and healing, they can live, they can thrive. So thank you so much.
It's always so wonderful to talk to you. It's always such a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And to all the listeners out there, if you are inspired, challenged, or even uncomfortable, lean into that. Let a voice you have long avoided grow louder, and find Christopher's tour dates, stories, and how to support or volunteer at alchemyartworkshops.org. Just refer to the show notes along with this episode. And until next time, I'm your host, Sana. Keep questioning, keep creating, and